Israel has launched a ground offensive into southern Lebanon, marking a significant escalation in the ongoing conflict. This development follows weeks of intense aerial bombardment that has left the region reeling. Minutes ago, the Israeli Defense Forces carried out airstrikes on the southern suburbs of Beirut.
I think we can show you some of those blasts that took place in the last few minutes, where we heard just behind us the bombardment of southern Beirut taking place there. So that was just behind me here. And we have seen a very similar campaign over the course of the last few days. Israel has issued a number of warnings asking people to leave.
These strikes occurred shortly after the IDF issued evacuation orders for residents in the area. The human toll of this conflict continues to mount at an alarming rate. Lebanon's Ministry of Public Health reports that 105 people have been killed and 359 wounded. The humanitarian crisis is deepening, with nearly 1 million Lebanese citizens now displaced from their homes.
Many people here fled for their lives during the Syrian civil war. Now they're returning because they think Syria is a better bet. They think it's a safer place to be than Lebanon. And you can see and you can feel the urgency. Nobody's hanging around.
Many have never visited their homeland before. They've spent their lives as refugees. Others are angry. The Israeli bombardment has forced 1 million people from their homes.
They came to us, they occupied us, and they want to impose themselves on us. Hassan Nasrallah was martyred. I hope there'll be 2,000 more Hassans.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government appears emboldened by the recent military successes. The assassination of Nasrallah on September the 27th was followed by a series of targeted strikes against the group's leadership and infrastructure. 18 of the top 18 officials of Hezbollah were terminated during those strikes. Netanyahu's support among Israelis has surged with each successful operation against Hezbollah, despite ongoing controversy surrounding his leadership in other areas. Meanwhile, Bibi Netanyahu addressed the Iranian people yesterday. His message was clear. He's opposed to the Iranian regime, not the Iranian people. But he also said the Iranian regime was not going to last for too long.
I want to address you, the people of Iran. I want to do so directly, without filters, without middlemen. Every day, you see a regime that subjugates you make fiery speeches about defending Lebanon, defending Gaza. Yet every day, that regime plunges our region deeper into darkness and deeper into war. Every day, their puppets are eliminated. Ask Mohammed Dev. Ask Nasrallah. There is nowhere in the Middle East Israel cannot reach. There's nowhere we will not go to protect our people and protect our country. With every passing moment, the regime is bringing you, the noble Persian people, closer to the abyss. The vast majority of Iranians know their regime doesn't care a whit about them. If it did care, if it cared about you, it would stop wasting billions of dollars on futile wars across the Middle East. It would start improving your lives. Imagine if all the vast money the regime wasted on nuclear weapons and foreign wars were invested in your children's education and improving your health care, in building your nation's infrastructure, water, sewage, all the other things that you need. Imagine that. But you know one simple thing. Iran's tyrants don't care about your future, but you do.
Meanwhile, Iran, Hezbollah's main backer, has issued stern warnings in response to Israel's actions. Tehran has declared that it will not let Israel's aggressive moves go unanswered, raising fears of a broader regional conflict. However, some analysts are suggesting that Iran may be hesitant to engage directly, preferring to act through a network of proxy forces across the Middle East. On the diplomatic front, efforts to broker peace seem to be falling short. The United States and France have proposed a 21-day ceasefire, but Israel appears to have rejected this offer. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is urgently calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities. However, Western diplomats are finding themselves increasingly powerless to de-escalate the rapidly deteriorating situation. Our guest today is Rick Petree, a managing director and co-founder of Global Power Partners, an investment banking firm focused on the renewable energy and clean technology sectors. Renewable energy has been Rick's passion for over 15 years. Rick holds a BA in philosophy, politics, and economics with first-class honors from Keble College at Oxford University and a JD from Harvard Law School, where he was an editor of the Harvard Law Review. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And for the last year, he's been joining me here on Narativ to talk about everything that's been going on in the Middle East since October 7th. And as you're about to hear, he does not mince his words. He always tells you exactly what it's like. Hello, Rick. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Zev.
Good to see you too. Thank you for joining us today. This has been a remarkable weekend. Such an impressive showing by Israel's intelligence services and the Israeli Defense Force in terms of eliminating the leadership of Hezbollah in the way that they have. It almost leaves you speechless in how effective it's been.
I don't think we've yet fully appreciated the height or depth of that expertise. Starting with the exploding pagers, we've seen the culmination of efforts that have been years in the planning and execution. And even today, we're seeing broadcasts from Tehran suggesting that some, at least, of what Israel has succeeded in doing against the leadership of Hezbollah and the Iranian liaison leadership with Hezbollah may be due to very high level and widespread penetration of Iranian security services by Israeli agents, Mossad. I just think that we're seeing something, the full scale of which is not yet apparent, but the tactical impact of which is clearly very real. Just in the last few hours, I think we've begun to see what I anticipated when the pagers all exploded, which is an actual Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon. State Department has confirmed that Israeli tanks have crossed the border, and the Lebanese army, as distinct, of course, from Hezbollah's own fighting units, has withdrawn from beyond the border region, leaving Hezbollah on their own to fight whatever fight they're able to with the Israelis at this point. Events move fast in this part of the world, Zev.
They sure do. And you're right about that ground operation, they're calling it. They're saying it's a limited ground operation.
Yeah.
I have used that terminology before, and it's not been very limited. Certainly not in Gaza. Who knows what they're planning in southern Lebanon? Clearly, if you look at Gaza as an example, it could be quite a big operation.
Yeah, it looks to me like they're really going for, at least for the near term, I hesitate to say a permanent solution in terms of the enemies that are arrayed against Israel, because I do fundamentally believe that we're in a cycle, the end of which cannot yet be seen. The hammer blows that are about to fall in southern Lebanon will be severe and will probably damage for the near term Hezbollah's offensive capability and may make parts of northern Israel safe again for Israelis to reoccupy homes and towns from which they've been driven by rocket fire out of southern Lebanon.
To 80,000, if I'm not mistaken.
If anything similar had happened here, the world would not hear the end of it. With terrorist organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas, there's an almost endless supply of guys who can be shifted into position. Now, with the rapidity with which Israel has struck at the Hezbollah high command, the replacements surely are not as seasoned and command ready as they should be in order to
clamoring for those jobs anyhow. I mean, that's not exactly a job with longevity.
I just think it's been a very successful outing by Israel, and they probably have succeeded in knocking Hezbollah back on its heels and making life from a military point of view a little safer and a little more comfortable.
Now, this is a chart released by the IDF showing the elimination of the top commanders, and they say they have 18 of the top 18. It's remarkable. It's truly remarkable that they've been able to do that.
It's primarily a story of intelligence success. The fact that once pinpointed, someone like Nasrallah can be bombed is not all that surprising, although as deep as he was in the earth, it's pretty impressive that they were able to reach him. This says volumes about the effectiveness and extent of Israeli intelligence and probably penetration of intelligence organizations.
Let's talk about Iran, because that is the target for Bibi Netanyahu. This is not about Hezbollah. It is, but of course it's not the final thing that he's focused on. He's really focused on regime change in Iran. And he addressed the Iranian people yesterday in a 3-minute address on X, which was quite stark, especially when he said that there would be a regime change and that it could happen much sooner than we would think. What do you think they have planned? You mentioned they have some penetration into the Iranian leadership in terms of their intelligence operations. They must have this gamed out. They must feel pretty confident that they can have regime change in Iran. What does that look like?
Never wise to underestimate the capabilities on the Israeli side. I took those remarks about regime change as aspirational or hortatory, but not very realistic. I personally don't think that there's about to be some sea change in Tehran. I think that the mullahs have that society pretty effectively locked down. But what I do think the Israelis have determined to do, and they're going to do this to the nth degree, is both degrade through decapitation of leadership, a military capability, and throw one hell of a big scare into the remaining leaderships and the sort of civilian leadership. I see reports that Khamenei has been moved out of Tehran and into a supposedly safe location somewhere in the mountains. All of them are, I am sure, terrified, as you or I would be, given what's been demonstrated. That disarray and confusion and fear, it is a very potent achievement in itself. It's going to slow up anything that Iran might have been thinking about doing. Israel doesn't need to claim that regime change was the objective when something almost as important has been achieved in the near term.
The Saudis, they don't even support the Palestinian cause anymore, it seems, in their latest utterances. It seems like they're not in the same position they were a few years ago. With them so clearly in Israel's camp, even though it's not yet officially a deal, that's whom they're siding with. It really leaves Iran as a very isolated player in the Middle East.
It does, and that's why I've seen a number of interesting interviews recently with Shiite clerics, one of whom I listened to last night, who grew up as a boy with Nasrallah, very much in that tradition, vehemently saying that Hamas and Hezbollah, having brought the wrath of Israel down on the heads of the Palestinians, have been doing Israel's work for it and working to undermine any decent hope for self-government or a better life that the Palestinians might have had. The Saudis and other Gulf Arabs view it in very much the same way, that whatever may now happen in the Middle East and whatever solution for the Palestinians can be achieved, the sort of armed faction of Hezbollah and Hamas are not part of that solution.
And so is this the two-state solution. As you survey the landscape, there are not a lot of people in the Middle East truly backing the two-state solution. There's some countries that are supportive of it, but inside Israel, there is not a lot of support for the two-state solution. In other parts of the Middle East, I think there's just a much greater interest in the oil and the resources coming out of Gaza and getting their hands on that than on the Palestinian cause per se. So they would happily trade off some of the Palestinian rights in exchange for that access.
We've talked about that in previous episodes. There is gas and oil offshore. There are offshore exploration licenses that have been granted. There are foreign multinationals poised to exploit those resources if the question of sovereignty and ownership can be resolved. That's directly related to effecting some kind of legal settlement around, particularly Gaza, around the Gazans, Palestinians who are there. That's an issue that will have to be sorted out over the next couple of years. It's all frozen.
But the two-state solution, is that something we can realistically see happening in the near future or any future?
As a phrase, two-state solution now has, people have reflexive reactions to it for and against. I'm not sure it's even a very useful construct or phrasing of the fundamental issue, which is that at some point, the Palestinian people have to achieve a full degree of self-government. They have to be in charge of their own communities without barriers and other kinds of harassment that they now live with. And they have to be able to chart their own future. Now, whether you call that a state or whether you call it something else within a loose kind of federalist structure overall, the security of which is overall dominated by Israel, I think remains to be seen. But I don't think that we're going to be able, as an international community, after what has now happened in Gaza, people are fairly firmly riveted on the need to finally come to some kind of a solution for the Palestinians. There's a lot of them, and they're not going away.
People like Jared Kushner, who broke his silence yesterday by issuing a statement on September the 27th. He's really seemed to believe that his work in setting up the Abraham Accords and all of that we've seen with the Israel's intelligence successes and the attacks on Hezbollah, that it's all one and the same thing, and that we really are heading into this nirvana future where the Saudis will pay for a lot of the rehabilitation of Gaza. The Palestinians that lived in Gaza may not even return to Gaza. In his view, I think he thinks that they'll be relocated somewhere in the Sinai or something like that. But he's got a very interesting view of what will happen. And if it happens, it'll be amazing. If something like that, amazing in terms of it's just a feat, not necessarily it's the right solution, but it would be remarkable to achieve such a massive shift in the geography of Israel, in the politics of the Middle East, and in the geographical location of the Palestinian people. That would be a huge trifecta.
I saw yesterday the Jordanian foreign minister made similar kinds of remarks. You referred a moment ago to the clampdown within Saudi Arabia on any kind of expressions of support for the Palestinians, even in social media. I saw people in Mecca being arrested or at least pulled aside for holding Palestinian. All of these signs indicate that for good reasons or bad reasons, a lot of the Arab governments will want to be done with the Palestinian issue. As Mohammed bin Salman said, we're not going to waste the next 30 years of our lives worrying about this.
Bibi Netanyahu, we've been critical of him on the show many times.
You're joking.
This is a redemption moment to some extent. He's able to pull all this off. It's a remarkable thing to eliminate Hezbollah. That would be historic if he could do it. It's not there yet. Mm-hmm. But would that be enough to change perceptions of his leadership in Israel and globally? I'll ask you a question about how it impacts American politics afterwards, but I'm interested in...
Well, it really is not for me to say whether this is fully restorative or rehabilitative for Bibi in the eyes of Israelis. That's a judgment that Israelis are going to have to make. Were I an Israeli, my answer to that would be no.
Yeah.
That he is a villain, a big one, and dangerous to democracy. And the Israel that I support and the Israelis within Israel whom I support are and have been for the better part of since even before October 7th in the streets, vehemently claiming their rights for a democratic state and pointing out that Bibi's government is dangerous to that objective.
He seems to be operating under the same notion that Israel has always operated under, that the ends justify the means. And so does Jared Kushner, it seems. Yeah. You've got these people who believe they can do anything as long as at the end of the day, the state of Israel is stronger and continues on as a place for Jewish refuge. But the younger generations in Israel do not feel that way anymore. And certainly the majority of Israelis don't feel that way. It'll be interesting to see whether if Hezbollah is eliminated and we get to these incredible feats, they will forget some of the bad things he's done and move on into some just of his biggest success.
Well, look, being realistic about that, I think it would be expected that some kind of triumphalist wave might now arise on the back of these successes. But as you say, we'll have to wait and see how Israelis judge the long term and whether the capture of Israeli government by some of the farthest right-wing elements in the society is something that they're prepared to live with for the long term. I would hope not.
Yeah, we all would hope not. And then, of course, the hostages are still being held hostage. I mean, they've probably been able to get them for a long time, rescue these guys, but they're not. It's just a tragedy to itself.
Yeah.
This question then about the American political scene that we're so used to October surprises in election years. This could be a very different October surprise. If we find ourselves in a few weeks from now and Bibi Netanyahu is triumphantly saying, hey, I've beaten Hezbollah, I've cleared out Hamas. I love Trump. I love this guy. He's the only one who could take us into the future. It's not the same kind of October surprise we've been used to. Oh, and by the way, here are your hostages. Could that change the dynamic of the American elections, and to what extent?
I really doubt it, mainly because looking only at our electorate, the sort of electoral divide is now cemented in place. The people are in the camps that they're going to be in. What you say could have had some impact if we had 10, 15, 20% of the electorate who just couldn't make their minds up and were undecided. But I don't think we're in that position. I think we're in a very tightly divided race, and we're, 40-some days away. So
Close. Very historic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rick. I really appreciate you being here today.
Always fun to talk to you.
Is there anything else you would want to say? Anything else that strikes you interesting?
No, it's just that I'm sure many who are watching this, I'm going to be over the next few hours very closely watching what happens in southern Lebanon. It's very important. And for the reasons we discussed at the top, I don't think that Iran is in a position to lash back in any significant way, which is another way of saying Israel has really scored a coup here.
Every attempt they've made to lash back in recent past has been a complete failure. You can't expect very much more under these circumstances when they've got 18 leaders, the top leaders of Hezbollah being eliminated. It's not going to make them feel confident.
Incredible.
Of anything. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
I appreciate you being here on Narativ tonight.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
It's so easy.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narativ, where truth lives.